Hello again, and welcome to another edition of the Language Fuel podcast. This is season 2, episode 4, and I did say that last time. I realized I had my numbers around the wrong way. It was actually episode 3 last time. Apologies, hope it didn't confuse too many of you. You didn't miss one, I missed the one. Anyway, this is season 2, episode 4. Now, before we get into, we're kind of working through our way at the moment through Gagne's 9 instructional events. But I first want to have a quick shout out to Victoria. Hello, Victoria. Victoria popped in to see me at the office last week. And it was just lovely to meet her. She has been watching these podcasts and, seeing us on social media. So it was really kind of nice to put a real person behind some names and that sort of thing. And another quick thank you to Malarville. Apologies if I am pronouncing your name wrong. I'm not quite sure which country you're from. But, I obviously had a bit of email back and forth. So thank you for that. And hopefully we can help you out with some of the topics you have suggested there for future podcasts, in particular around genre. So look forward to serving you in that way. All right, so at the moment in our podcast series, we're going over Gagne's famous 9 steps of instructional design. I think he's calling them 9 steps of instruction. Very, kind of fundamental in the instructional design area, may or may not be familiar to you as a language teacher. I don't know. We talked in episode 2, I'm getting all my numbers mixed up. I think it was episode 2, we talked briefly about, gaining the attention of the learner. And that came from that big discussion on whether or not, language classes always have to be fun. Sometimes they do, but that, they don't. Sometimes they can be, but they don't have to be as long as you're capturing attention. Last time we talked a little bit about steps 2 and 3, which are inform the learner of the objective and stimulate recall of prior knowledge. And I talked a wee bit there about how you may or may not end up informing the learner of the objective depending on kind of how you want to structure your lesson. Anyway, today we're going to have a quick chat about steps number 4 and number 5. So after you have sort of set the scene, you've gained the attention, you've informed them of the objective if you're doing that, and you've kind of helped them remember the things that they already know, you're ready to kind of do the quote unquote teaching bit. Like this is the sort of core of how you go about teaching. And there's 2 parts to it. The first one is presenting the stimulus material, and the second is providing learning guidance. They are different. If you want to kind of use more everyday terms, you could think of the first one being the setup. You're setting up a scenario. I like to use scenarios personally, a story or a situation that people can imagine or find themselves in. And then you're helping them, this is the guidance part, to do that learning themselves. Remember we mentioned last time, people learn. It's not, a teacher doesn't make learning happen. A teacher creates the environment where learning can take place. So you present the stimulus, you set something up, and then you help them, you provide the guidance for them to figure out what it is that they need to be learning. And of course, that's your objective, whether or not you've told them. So you're kind of helping learners make the connection between their prior knowledge and the new knowledge that they need. So a few comments about that. Obviously, we're thinking specifically about language learning here. So when you are doing the setup or providing the stimulus material, as is the kind of official edu speak, if you like, what's really important is to think about what skills you're actually teaching in the class. So if you are teaching a speaking class, remember there's 4 macro skills or main skills when you're teaching a language. It's reading, writing, listening, and speaking. In fact, I should have said it the other way around, because the primary skills are listening and speaking. Listening comes first. That's what we do first in our first language, listening and speaking. And then the written skills of reading and writing. So those are the 4 macro skills. Within each of those skills, of course, there's a variety of what we call micro skills. So lots of different little pieces of that puzzle, if you like. So you don't just suddenly learn to read. There's a whole lot of things you need to do to be able to read. Anyway, I want just to think at the sort of highest macro level there, think about which skill you're actually going to be teaching. So if you, like I started to say, if you're going to be teaching speaking, your setup, your presenting of the stimulus material is not going to be in writing, because typically a response to that would be written. So if you're going to have a spoken practice, if your goal, your objective of the lesson is to get learners speaking, they need to be in a situation where the most natural response to that stimulus that you're about to create for them, to that setup, is a spoken response to it. So when do we speak in real life? Well, when we're with another person, right? Someone's right there asking me a question. I need to give them an answer. I need to speak out as an answer. So you want to set up a situation as close as you can to reality where that's just the most natural thing that's going to happen. That might kind of sound obvious, and I apologies if it does seem rather obvious, but I want to say that I have taught many students here in New Zealand in an English classroom where they had learned for years the English language in their home country. But how have they learned it? They've learned it through reading and writing. So they have great spelling. They may have good grammar. Typically, they've worked through workbooks and tests and all that kind of thing, but it's all written. So if you ask them to fill in a gap in a grammatical exercise, they can do it. But they really struggle with speaking. And I think it's just because they've never had the practice. And if you as a teacher are not clear that they're very different skills, knowing a grammar rule and being able to write a grammar rule down is very different from being able to speak spontaneously when I've been asked a question. So although it may seem a little obvious, be very conscious which skill your objective of teaching is for that particular lesson, and make sure you're setting it up, providing the stimulus appropriately for that. That's sort of a language thing, but I'll never forget when, slightly off topic here, our youngest daughter was about 3 when we moved into the house that we're living in now, and this house has a swimming pool. Very cold in winter, of course, in New Zealand. You don't swim in winter. And it was just coming into the swimming season. So kind of like now, we've got these beautiful spring days here in New Zealand at the moment. Shout out to you in the Northern Hemisphere if you've got autumn. I know a lot of people are coming back to school at this time of year. So, welcome back to work if you like. But it's spring here. And around about this time, this is maybe it must have been about 8 years ago, I think, when we bought this house. And our youngest daughter, who was 3 at the time, she'd been having swimming lessons. Now, her lessons were in a warm, heated pool, as you can imagine, for little toddlers. So she could actually do quite a bit at that stage. At 3 years old, she could float on her face, she could kick and blow bubbles, and, she was working on her arm movements and so on. But she had no problem floating on her face, on her back, and then standing back up again in this warm training pool. Now, it was springtime, very cold pool, but just getting warm enough that we could start kind of maybe paddling, having a bit of fun in the shallow end of the pool. Well, we went in one day, and my daughter, who could quite happily float and kick and blow bubbles, was standing in the shallow end, and she just slipped on something in the pool, I don't know, went face down and did absolutely nothing. No bubbling, no standing back up or kicking or floating. It was just, I think the difference in temperature between a cold and a warm pool gave her such a shock that she didn't know what to do. I mean, I was right there. I just picked her up and she was all upset and crying. And I thought, this had never happened in the pool where she'd been learning swimming lessons. So I only remember that because when you are setting the scene, this is, step 4 of Gagné's famous instructional design, what you're teaching them has to, as close as possible, resemble what you want them to do in real life. Because practicing in a warm pool, very different from doing the real thing in a cold pool. So that, at 3, it's a bit of a shock, and probably there's a few other things going on. But, bring that to your thinking when you're doing a lesson plan. Writing things down does not translate to being able to speak. So that's just something to think about there. Okay, so you've set the scene as much as possible. You've kind of been able to build or rebuild or recreate a situation where you're going to practice or teach some language for the student to learn. The next step, which is step 5 in our 9-step model, is to provide that learning guidance. Sometimes this step is called scaffolding. So if you've been in the industry for a while, that's sort of what this is. It's scaffolding. It's giving them the steps that they can just little tiny steps that they can sort of connect in their brain from what they already know to this new piece that they are learning. So it might be asking them a couple of questions, prompting them to guess what might be appropriate to say, or something like that, helping them recognize what they already do know. And then literally providing them, in the case of language, because it's new information, new words perhaps, or a new structure or a new phrase, you can give them that at that point. That's the guidance. Here it is. This is what you need to do. So you've taught them, if you like. So that's kind of the most obvious real teaching bit out of all of these 9 steps. What I wanted to say about these 2 steps, the kind of presenting the stimulus material and providing the learning guidance, these can be done ahead of time. It can be done outside the classroom. And if you are familiar with the term flipped learning, that's kind of how this would work. In other words, you could set up a situation, even if it's only mentally and verbally. Now, I did say, ideally, it's as close as possible to real life. So I will stand by that. However, you can get people imagining to being in the situation through providing a video like I'm doing to you now. You could get people to watch a video ahead of time where they're imagining that situation. And if you can make it as vivid as possible with images, maybe sound files and that kind of thing, they can imagine themselves being in a situation. And then you could give them the target language that you're hoping to teach as the learning guidance piece. And then the rest of the steps of the 9 steps of instructions, which we'll get to next time, you can do in the classroom. So flipped learning, and we'll talk about this a little bit more next time, it'll be a bit clearer, involves that whole setup and actual quote unquote teaching. I don't like to use the word because it's not very precise, that providing the actual language and the setup can be done ahead of time, so that when you have the face-to-face time in the classroom, you're doing the other stuff, which is just as important and perhaps needs you a little bit more, kind of around practice and feedback and that sort of thing. All right, I'm going to stop there. That's our kind of 10 minutes, short and sweet, done. So we've knocked off 2 more out of the 9 steps, and I'll probably get either 1 or 2 more episodes and we'll have the 9 steps done. Thank you very much for listening or watching. I would love to connect with you in our Language Fuel community. It's free to join us. We have we've got a mailing list, an emailing list. You can find that on our website, languagefuel.com. You'll find how to join the mailing list. We have a free Facebook group, Language Fuel Community. Just search for us. You can join it for free. You can discuss any of the ideas that we talk about here on the podcast, or share some ideas with your colleagues there. We also have premium membership available if you want to have a little bit more formal training in terms of how to teach a language. Then you can get access to all of our online courses with a small monthly fee. So you can have a look at all of that at languagefuel.com, navigate your way around the site. We're actually in the middle of rebuilding the site, so if you come back in a couple of weeks' time, it'll be up, and it's quite exciting. Sophie's working on that in the meantime. So thank you, Sophie, for doing that. Yes, I shall see you online and talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Language Fuel podcast. You can see more at www.languagefuel.com/podcast, or you can see us on YouTube at youtube.com/languagefuel.